My phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in 15 years. Serafina, my ex-girlfriend. I picked up, bracing myself, but nothing could have prepared me for what she said. I need you to donate your kidney to me. I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Seriously, Serafina, find someone else. Your body hasn't rejected an organ in over a decade. I was already moving the phone away to hang up when her voice, quick and cracking, stopped me cold. It's not for me. It's for my son. He's 9. Please. A brief 4-second flicker of sympathy hit me, quickly extinguished by the memory of who she was. Serafina, I'm sorry about your kid, but no. I hung up. The incident would have ended there, a bizarre footnote, but an hour later, a heavy knock echoed through my apartment. It was Serafina, tears already streaming, and my younger brother Orion standing beside her. We need to talk, Orion said, pushing past me, his face hard and unforgiving. Serafina followed, sobbing quietly. For an hour, they ran a relentless, suffocating campaign. Serafina cried about her dying son. Orion branded me a heartless coward and a monster. Every attempt I made to ask why Orion was even involved was met with accusations of me being selfish. Finally, after a dozen explicit refusals, Serafina looked me dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You're going to donate whether you like it or not. The next week was a calculated siege. Serafina and Orion operated as a team, ambushing me in public places. I'd be having a quiet lunch at a cafe, and suddenly they'd descend, causing a scene. They'd yell loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear that I was willingly condemning a child to death. I became the unwilling star of a public morality play, subjected to universal judgment. Serafina escalated the campaign dramatically. One afternoon, I was on a critical Zoom call with my company's CEO, discussing a possible promotion, when she walked right into my home office. By her side was a pale, fragile 9-year-old boy in a hospital mask. She steered him directly toward my desk, her voice ringing out for everyone on the video call to hear. This is the man who can save your life. The boy looked up at me with huge, pleading eyes. Are you going to save me? He whispered. My CEO immediately froze, staring. Serafina had her phone out, filming the entire exchange. Serafina, this is wildly unfair, I managed. What's not fair is letting a child die, she shot back, still recording, before turning to my CEO. Your employee is choosing to let a child pass away. The CEO disconnected moments later. The rumor that I was a perfect match who refused to save a dying child blew up at the office. That night, Orion arrived at my door with legal-looking documents. I talked to a lawyer, he said, laying them out on my kitchen counter. You can be sued for failure to render aid to a minor. You could face criminal charges. The papers appeared official, complete with a court letterhead and dense legal jargon. Just sign the consent form, Orion urged, or deal with this in court. I told him to get out. The next morning, as I started researching the legitimacy of the documents, Orion sent a cryptic text. Good luck. Moments later, my doorbell rang. Opening it, I was confronted by Serafina's entire family, her mother, her father, even her frail grandmother in a wheelchair. They surged into my living room and surrounded me. For 5 suffocating hours, they rotated shifts, her mother sobbing over the potential loss of her grandson, her father shouting about family responsibility. The whole time, a single question hammered at my brain. How did Orion know they were coming? Were he and Serafina secretly together? The final blow came when Serafina launched a GoFundMe campaign, using my full name and photo with the title, Help Us Convince Elias to Save a Dying Child. It detailed how I was a perfect match but refused to donate, gaining 617 shares in 3 days. My life was public property. Calls and texts from friends and family, including a tearful call from my own mother, demanding to know if the terrible story was true, overwhelmed me. I blocked Serafina, but the siege continued. A few days later, in the pre-dawn darkness, Serafina showed up at my door. distraught and shaking, claiming the doctors gave her son days, maybe weeks. Exhausted and worn down, I finally agreed to a single concession. Fine, I'll get tested. If I'm not a match, you leave me alone forever. Her entire demeanor instantly changed. She pulled out her phone and texted someone. 8 minutes later, there was a knock. Orion stood there with a cheek swab testing kit. They both watched, silent and tense as I swabbed my cheek. Serafina took the kit, promising results in 4 days. The results, when they came, were unbelievable. I was a perfect match. The odds for a non-sibling match were astronomically low, 1 in 20,000. It made absolutely no sense. But there they were, Serafina and Orion standing in my apartment, hugging and celebrating. "We can schedule the surgery next week," Serafina breathed. "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you." I didn't agree to anything, I insisted. "But you're a match," Orion snapped, his face flushed with anger. "You have to do it now." Looking at him, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Why do you care this much, Orion? Why are you so involved in her kid's life?" The celebrating stopped. The room went silent. I pressed on. "How long have you two been together?" Serafina looked at the floor. Orion quietly pulled his hand from her shoulder. 8 years, he whispered. My world tilted on its axis. I stared at my brother, the man who had been lying to me for almost a decade. "Is the kid yours?" I demanded. "That's not your business," Serafina mumbled. "Then why is donating a kidney to him my business?" My voice was loud, shaking. Serafina erupted in genuine, non-manipulative tears. "Because he's yours," she choked out. "The boy is your son." "I didn't tell you. Orion and I started dating right after we broke up, and he's been raising him as his own. The revelation was a physical blow. I had a son, a dying son, and everyone in my life had been in on the secret but me. 9 years. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably, a tremor that wouldn't stop. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family photo on my mother's mantelpiece where I had stood next to my own child, completely unaware. I thought of the boy's smile, his laugh, my smile, my laugh. I raised my hand toward Orion, stopping myself only at the last second, my whole body shaking with visceral betrayal. Serafina moved between us. "Please, we need to talk about this," she begged. I pointed at the door. "Get out now." I walked to the door and threw it open, the sound echoing through the silence. Orion whispered a hollow, "I'm sorry," as they finally walked out. The door slammed, leaving me alone in a new, terrifying reality. I paced my apartment for hours, cycling between rage and disbelief. My mind obsessively replayed every interaction with the boy I now knew was my son. All those moments where I had seen a familial resemblance and dismissed it as coincidence. The realization that my entire family, my parents, my siblings, my cousins, had likely known or at least suspected and said nothing, was almost as staggering as the secret itself. Around midnight, my phone exploded with notifications. The family group chat was alight, and individual texts from my mother, father, and sister piled up. I ignored them all until my mother began calling again and again. On the 14th try, I answered. "Mom," I said. She was hysterical, barely intelligible. "Elias, is it true? Is Orion's boy really yours?" Her voice was shattered. "Yeah, it's true," I whispered. She let out a wrenching sob. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." I immediately asked the only thing that mattered. "How long have you known?" She confessed she had suspected for a while, but Orion had sworn it wasn't true, claiming it would destroy the family if the truth came out. I recounted the entire saga of manipulation, harassment, and the fake legal documents. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "You should meet him." Oliver. The name, Oliver, hit me differently. He was no longer just the kid. He was a person, my son, with a name. He's your son, Elias. He's dying, she pleaded. Unable to process the life and death gravity of the situation, I hung up. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years. An hour later, my closest work friend, Wayne Tucker, arrived with coffee and food. I told him the whole story. He listened in shocked silence, occasionally muttering, "What the hell?" When I was done, Wayne asked the inevitable painful question. "What are you going to do about the kid?" My voice was flat. "I don't know. I'm still trying to process that I have a son. A dying son?" Wayne leaned forward, his gaze earnest. "Look, this is incredibly messed up. But he's a 9-year-old kid who didn't ask for any of this. And you're the only one who can save him." I put my head in my hands. Everyone says that like the last 9 years of lies don't matter. Wayne's response was direct. "It's not about forgetting. It's about figuring out if you can live with yourself if you don't save him." That evening, my father, Mr. Vance, arrived, his face flushed with anger and grief. "We need to talk," he stated. He had been on the phone with Orion all day. "I am trying to understand how my son could hide something like this from his own brother, from his whole family." I finally felt a shift of tension leave my shoulders. He was angry at Orion. He confessed he'd always found Orion and Seraphina's sudden relationship suspicious, but never imagined this. Orion had confessed everything to him, claiming he agreed to raise the boy because he loved Seraphina and desperately wanted to be a father. Watching my father's face crumble, the full weight of the betrayal settled in. "One of my sons lied to this family for 9 years," Dad said, his voice cracking. "And now the other son has to decide if he's going to save a child's life." Alone again, around 10 p.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. I typed in "kidney donation" and began to read. I learned that the human body can function normally with one kidney, but the surgery carried real risks: bleeding, infection, and a small, long-term chance of high blood pressure or kidney disease. The recovery was a lengthy 6 to 8 weeks. Every medical website stressed the same thing. The procedure was generally safe, but not without risk. Around 3 a.m., I found myself typing Seraphina's name and GoFundMe into the search bar. Someone had archived the page before she took it down. Scrolling through it, I felt physically ill. Below the horrifying title and my company photo was Seraphina's narrative of my refusal. The comments section was a torrent of hatred. "Monster. Heartless. How can you let a child die? I hope karma gets you." One comment suggested I should be forced to donate, another called me a murderer. These strangers, armed with Seraphina's manipulative half-truth, were convinced I was evil. I slammed the laptop shut and sat in the dark, the public shame compounding the private agony. The next morning, my mother arrived with breakfast and a photo album. She explained she'd been keeping it separate, a collection of Oliver's childhood, a newborn baby, a toddler taking first steps, a little boy at Christmas. Tucked into the back was a recent photo. Oliver in a hospital bed, pale and thin, with tubes in his arm. But the thing that broke me was seeing my own eyes staring back at me from the photo, my nose, my whole face. "That's him now," my mother whispered. I looked at the fragile boy in the picture and finally understood. This was no longer an abstract problem about lies and betrayal. This was a real dying child who looked exactly like me. I agreed to meet him at the hospital under the condition that medical staff were present, and it didn't commit me to anything. I arrived at the hospital the next day, directed by my mother to the transplant coordinator's office. The coordinator, a calm, professional woman, laid out the facts without any emotional pressure. Oliver had weeks at most. His kidney function was at 15% and dropping fast. She confirmed the perfect, though statistically unlikely match. The urgency of the situation was terrifyingly real. I asked for his name again. Oliver. The coordinator led me to his room. Seraphina and Orion were inside, and she gently asked them to step out. They walked past me, their faces a mixture of fear and desperation. They knew this meeting was the pivot point of their son's life. I walked into the room. Oliver was smaller than I expected, incredibly pale with an IV pole next to his bed, but he was sitting up playing a handheld game. When he looked up, he smiled. It was my smile, the exact same crooked grin. My chest tightened painfully. I managed a quiet hi and sat down. For 20 minutes, we talked about his video game, his school, his favorite foods, and how much he missed playing soccer. He was funny, bright, and utterly captivating. Then, his innocent, direct question brought me back to earth. Are you going to give me your kidney? He looked at me with my own eyes. He said his mom told him I was a perfect match, but I hadn't decided. He understood if I was scared, he said, but he really wanted to go home and play soccer again. I froze, my mouth unable to form a word. The coordinator stepped in, calling it a conversation for another time. I left the hospital 15 minutes later without making a decision, only seeing Oliver's hopeful, pale face and my own eyes looking back at me. The pressure mounted in the days following the visit. Wayne called asking if I could live with myself if I let my own son die. Then Mr. Lombardi, Serafina's father, called, offering me $50,000 for the kidney. I recoiled. The idea that he thought he could buy my organ insulted me more than any manipulation. I told him the decision would be mine alone, made freely and hung up. My lawyer confirmed the legal truth. The papers Orion presented were completely fake. I could not be forced to donate, nor could I be sued. The decision was entirely and finally my own. I got a second opinion from an independent transplant surgeon who confirmed the risks and the necessity of my choice being voluntary. I spent 3 days in isolation contemplating the weight of the choice. The following week, I called the hospital. I told the transplant coordinator I was ready to move forward with the evaluation. The process began immediately. Blood tests, CT scans, a psychological evaluation, and an ethics board meeting to ensure my decision was voluntary, despite the complicated history. I told the ethics board truthfully that there had been massive pressure, but I was choosing this freely because I could not live with the alternative. The board approved the donation. 3 days later, Serafina called in hysterics. Oliver's condition had crashed. He was moved to the ICU. I sped to the hospital. Oliver was unconscious, hooked up to a ventilator and surrounded by machines. The doctor confirmed he had days, maybe a week, at most. The ethics board granted an emergency approval. The surgery was scheduled for 3 days later. I visited Oliver and, for the first time, spoke the promise aloud. I am going to give you my kidney, Oliver. His eyes, my eyes, watched me, and the last of my doubt vanished. The decision wasn't about Serafina or Orion or the 9 years of lies. It was only about the innocent, dying life of my son.